Steve, what about these RedHawks? They've been like a 500 program the last 5 years, almost like clockwork. Every year they're going to hit about 6 or 7 wins, be a decent team in the MAC. We hit on it a little bit. Brett Gabbert, 4 touchdowns, no picks last year. Avion Smith was their starting quarterback. Couple top rushers, couple top receivers back. Your thoughts about what the RedHawks bring to the table in 23?
Yes, they're the model of consistency really in the MAC. Chuck Martin is now the MAC's longest tenured head coach at 10 years. And his offensive coordinator has been on staff for 10 years. His defensive coordinator has been on staff for 10 years. So there's a lot of continuity in this program. And Miami, they usually go 1-3 in non-conference play. They'll take out their FCS team and usually lose 3 other games. Last year, they snapped an 11-game streak. They won their first non-conference FBS game since 2011, excluding bowl season, defeating Northwestern at Ryan Field early on in the season. But before that, they hadn't won since 2011 against Army. So you don't see too many non-conference wins with Miami. But one thing you do see with them is they win in MAC play a lot. They haven't finished below 500 in MAC play since 2015. So even though they usually have difficult non-conference schedules to ramp up the year, by the time MAC play hits, this team's usually ready, and Chuck Martin has his guys going. And this year's Red Hawk squad, I actually picked them as my preseason and MAC champions. I know Toledo's a common pick. Toledo returns a lot of talent, but Miami basically returns about 9 starters from what was the MAC's top scoring defense and top run defense in 2022. And they get Brett Gabbert back at quarterback. And if you want to know how much impact Brett Gabbert has, I'll tell you this. In 2022, he played 4 games, missed the majority of the season. Miami had a bottom 10 passing defense. When he was a full-time starter in 2021, they ranked 21st in the country in passing. It is night and day. Their offense couldn't really accomplish much last year in his absence. So with Gabbert back in the lineup, I expect Miami to be a lot more explosive on the offensive side and in the passing game this year to go along with a pretty good stout defense.
Cam, you nailed it. I didn't want to call you out. You're right. 2 years ago, Brett Gabbert had that kind of season. Then he missed all that time last year. Right, Steve?
Yes, that's correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
I know what I'm talking about, man. Like, I don't just come out here and say random stuff. Like, yeah, you know, like I see you with your Phil Steele and everything. I got my CFB stats up here and everything, also as well. So yeah, we know, do the research.
But we were just talking last week about how neither one of us knew anything about the RedHawks, and I just thought, where did Cam get this about 25 touchdown passes?
Hey man, look, I read everything and I do my research, which is like why I know that the Miami Hurricanes are 3-0 against the Miami RedHawks. The games were 1945, 1947, and then 1946, and then 1987 being the last time that these teams played, with that being the largest margin of victory for the Canes of 54-3 the last time that these teams did match up. So I mean, I would love to see something along those lines. I think with the Gabbert kid back, that does present some challenges for a defensive secondary that is completely rebuilding. Well, not completely rebuilding, at least at the cornerback position. Things are rebuilding because both of our corners from last year are on NFL, our starting corners are on NFL rosters. And there's going to be a big rotation of the other guys because, we have to find guys who can play. So I think that there's, it's not going to be, this is not the HBCU beatdown of the year. This is not going to be 77-3. I think that, and we saw things broke down some last year, Middle Tennessee State and others took advantage of those kind of things. So with somebody of Gabbert's talent, I think that can present issues at times. And I think it will present issues because I don't think that we're at the point of being completely and totally locked down. But at the end of the day, I do think that there's too much talent on this roster for it to go the other way. But I've been doing this too long and I've seen things go the opposite way against the Hurricanes more than a little bit. So hopefully that does not happen this Friday night at 7.
I'm the nerd that likes the scores and stats and to look back and be like, oh yeah, I remember that game. Oh yeah, I remember that game. So I love this stat, Steve, about going back to 2011 where they don't have any FBS wins outside the conference. And I'm looking at these games. Yeah. And about half the time they're competitive. But about half the other time, how about this one, Cam? You would love this game, 76-5 against
Ohio State, 2019.
6-5. Good Lord, I do remember that one.
Hey, you got a safety in there.
They were up 5-0.
They were up 5-0.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Okay, yeah, I remember that game now. Yes. The
And they won the
Thumper.
conference that year.
Steve, you love to focus on everyone. I know I bring you on for Group of Five analysis a ton because those guys are tough to come by, and you are my ace in the hole when it comes to Group of Five. But you follow everyone. How do you evaluate this Miami team, meaning Miami of Florida, coming into this season?
Well, I'm kind of excited to watch the return of Tyler Van Dyke. He's someone who has a very similar trajectory in his career to what Brett Gabbert's had. They both had stellar 2021 seasons. We saw Van Dyke wrap up that season with 6 straight games of 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, just dominant quarterback. But he never really got there last year. He was marred by injuries, just missed so much time. It seemed like he was always banged up or hurt the entire season. And I know that there is the discussion of his thumb injury going into this game, although Mario Cristobal and other players keep assuring he's 100%, but we should approach it with at least some skepticism in that regard. But I'm excited for the return of Van Dyke. I think he's a good quarterback, and I think that Miami could accomplish what they were set out to do in 2022 before the season. I do have some concerns on the offense. I don't know who their receiver who's really going to step up and snatch that number one receiver by the throat is going to be. They didn't really have one last year. I mean, Will Mallory was the guy, and he's now on the Indianapolis Colts. So breaking in a new tight end of Will Mallory's caliber, we've seen a lot of good tight ends, Brevin Jordan at Miami past few years. So breaking in a new tight end, I know they got a transfer from Oregon there that may compete for playing time. And then at wide receiver, they got Tyler Harrell, who's incoming transfer, maybe looking to be one of the top guys with Restrepo and Young. So I'm curious to see how their receiving core is. As far as defense, Cam Kinchins is as good as any safety in the country. He's a ball hawk. He's going to be a great run stopper against what isn't really an effective Miami, Ohio rushing offense. And he'll definitely make his presence known Friday. But I'm a little higher on the cornerbacks than it seemed like you were earlier, because I watched a lot of Devontae Brown at UCF, and he's a pretty solid cornerback. And UCF had a pretty good pass defense last year, which ranked in probably the upper third in college football in passing yards allowed per game. And then
it's not that I'm down on them per se, but like I've seen guys perform elsewhere and then struggle when the lights get bright here at Miami. You know, D. Delaney was first team FCS All-American. You know, he was projected as like a second or third round draft pick. He decided not to go to the draft and come to Miami, and those first couple of weeks looked like a fish out of water. So, you know, in terms of that, that's what gives me a little pause. In terms of the Brown boys, I've literally watched them play their entire lives. I worked with their father at Miramar High School for 11 years. I remember going to and talking through the film because they would win these Optimus championships year after year. So me and Selwyn were like this, who's a, you know, 2-time champion in college at Miami himself. So like I actually have been familiar with Devontae and Damari Brown since they were knee high to a fly. So like, yeah, I mean, maybe some people might not have been in on that, but like I'm in a unique situation where I was very aware of them and their growth and development through their entire lives. But in general, like to me, it's just unsettled at cornerback, because you had 2 dudes who played more than like 600 or 700 snaps last year. Both of those guys, DJ Ivey and Tyreek Stevenson, are gone to the NFL. And now there's a mismatch group of potential talented guys and Smurfs trying to figure out the rotation and depth chart thing at corner. And with so many teams with the, you know, proliferation of 3 and 4 and 5 wide offenses, you're going to need these guys not just to be halfway capable, you're going to need them to play meaningful snaps, you know, in games and execute. And just simply with, I mean, Jaden Davis did it from the slot at Oklahoma. Corey Couch fancies himself as outside cornerback, but he's smaller than Davis. So like you got 2 real pint-sized guys fighting for the snaps inside, and then the Brown brothers, Damari Devontae, Jadaeus Richard, you know, on the outside trying to figure that out. So it's just, to me, it's really unsettled because especially the way that Kevin Steele ran the defense last year, it was 2 on one side, 8 on the other side, set it and forget it the entire season long.
Well, rarely does a team win a game not being balanced on offense, but does Miami, just meaning the RedHawks, just kind of cut loose and try to tear those guys up and throw it 45 times?
Oh, yeah. I mean, last year they had to redefine their MO offensively when Gabbert went out. They brought in Avion Smith, who was a running quarterback, didn't really have close to the same arm talent. And I said they were a bottom 10 pass defense in the country. Avion Smith wasn't completing balls more than 10 yards across the line of scrimmage usually, but he was a talented runner. But overall, I do have concerns about Miami, Ohio's offensive line. It's a unit that has a lot of continuity, and they return a lot of starting experience. And they get Sam Vaughn back. Sam Vaughn was their starting left tackle who got hurt in the opener against Kentucky last year, never played again, and also experience developed in his absence too, so they have depth at the positions. But that offensive line, they didn't have a very good running game behind it, getting under 4 yards per carry. No running back was really breaking out for 100-yard performances other than the one-time Keon Mosey went crazy on Northwestern. Other than that, I don't know if the RedHawks had a 100-yard running back the entire season. And then as a pass blocking unit, they allowed more than 2.9 sacks per game, ranking in the bottom 25 in the country. So I think Leonard Taylor, those Miami Hurricanes up front, are really going to assert themselves against the RedHawks offensive line. I think we're going to see a lot of down and distance situations, third and longs for Miami, Ohio. They're going to have to pick apart that defense with a pass. And the thing about that is the receiver position is probably where Miami, Ohio has some of the least experience. Is almost all their receiving yardage last year were allocated toward Matt Hippenhammer, and they need a new guy to step up. Hippenhammer had more than double the catches, receiving yards, more than quadruple the touchdowns of the next closest guy on the roster. But they brought in a few transfers, Joe Wilkins Jr. from Notre Dame, who hopes to see a similar trajectory to that of Hippenhammer, because Hippenhammer came from Penn State. He was hardly utilized there. And then he goes to Miami, Ohio, and becomes the number one guy. So I think they want to see that with Joe Wilkins Jr., maybe Cade McDonald, who they got from Michigan State, or an FCS transfer in Gage Larvadane, who was, I think, Southland Conference, all Southland Conference at the FCS. So they're breaking in a new cast of receivers, but I think given the coach's faith that they put in Gabbert, this is going to be Miami, Ohio primarily striking with a passing attack on Friday night.
So, Steve, before we let you go, do the RedHawks stay in this game? What's your feel?
I've presented this in my preview, and every show that I've appeared on this week, I have a final score of Miami, Florida 30, Miami, Ohio 21. And how I think the game plays out is I think that the Hurricanes establish maybe a 14-0 lead or something like that out of the gate and kind of remain one step ahead the entire game, where the RedHawks are down kind of 2-ish, 3-ish scores and keep softening the deficit, but overall it won't be enough. And Miami, Florida is going to dominate those trenches, I feel like, on when the RedHawks have the ball. And it's going to be a tough running day for the RedHawks, and they might face a lot of sacks. I think this will play out pretty similarly to Miami, Ohio's game against Kentucky last year, where they were able to move the ball pretty well, but they couldn't finish possessions, and Kentucky ended up taking them in the end and getting points on their defense. But for the RedHawks, their defense is pretty stout against the run, but I think Tyler Van Dyke's going to pick apart the back end and give the Hurricanes 30 points in this one.
I guess my follow-up question should be, what's your record against the spread?
This season,
I'm just kidding.
I missed Ohio, San Diego State, but I didn't foresee Ohio's quarterback Curtis Rourke getting hurt at the beginning of the game. Louisiana Tech, FIU, I missed the spread on that one. I thought Louisiana Tech wouldn't miss all those field goals. They'd sustain their possessions and they win 22-17. I thought they'd blow them out. UTEP, Jacksonville State, I got that one wrong. UTEP just had terrible play calling in that game, and all they needed was one touchdown drive at the end to cover the spread. So in all the previews I've written this year, I think I have got the spread wrong. So my track record isn't good this season, but it's a small sample size, and we have room.
I'm just kidding, Steve. Just kidding.